Welcome to Uncomfortable Conversations, and thank you for supporting our mission to enlighten, encourage, and empower our viewers from around the world to be willing and ready to have uncomfortable conversations with our children, relatives, friends, and peers who may have dissimilar perspectives, and most likely they do have dissimilar perspectives. Would you agree, if we're willing to listen without judgment, argument, or debate, we allow ourselves the opportunity to learn a dissimilar perspective and confront our own biases, assumptions, and stereotypes that prohibit growth? For example, last week's conversation on obesity isn't easy to have with someone who's concerned about your health or if you're concerned about theirs. Nevertheless, if we don't have this conversation on health literacy, it can have an impact on our physical and mental health for the people we want to help. So actor Glenn Close said, "What our mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, and more unashamed conversation." That was Glenn Close who said it. And so let's get started with those conversations. And if it's your first time tuning into the show, my name is CJ Grace. I'm the author of 2 comic self-help books, My Wild Ride, How to Thrive After Breast Cancer and Infidelity, and Adulterer's Wife, How to Thrive Whether You Stay or Not. And I'm honored to co-host today's show with Irina Portnova. She's a manifestation and mindset coach, and her company is Life Palette Coaching. Welcome, Irina. And you're streaming live from New York City. Is it cold there, or are you starting to get some nice spring or even summer weather?
Thank you so much for this warm introduction. And yes, it's getting better and better in New York City weather-wise. And I just love the conversation that we are going to have today.
Yeah. And as a life coach, how do you embrace difficult conversations?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, each week we discuss topics that are uncomfortable in nature, but they require us to listen, to learn without debate and judgment, with the goal of learning at a similar perspective. Are you ready? Our conversation topic is on transgenderism and gender identity. Our guest, Andrea Lee, is a speaker, author, and high performance business coach. She was on the show earlier this year and shared her gender transition from male to female.
And Andrea is going to share her unique perspective on transgenderism on the job and in sports after the break. She has a wealth of experience. She was in the corporate world for almost 30 years as a Pfizer executive, and then she moved into the fashion industry, and now she is a high performance coach. So, Irina, before we begin our conversation, how are we honoring and recognizing Mental Health Awareness Month?
Well, in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, our mission is to address the many challenges that face millions of people around the world living with the mental health conditions. Throughout the month, organizations actively participate in this national movement dedicated to eradicating stigmas, extending support, fostering public education, and advocating for policies that prioritize the well being of individuals and families affected by mental illness. We are doing our part by sharing empowering stories of people that are sharing mental health advocacy in songs, books, poems, and businesses.
So, when we come back from break, we're going to be beginning our conversation on the impact that transgenderism is having in the workplace and in sports. And during our break, in the YouTube video, we're going to see transgender people discussing what they see as discrimination around employer washrooms. And they criticize biological women who don't hold these views as TERFs. That stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. Well, our goal here on Uncomfortable Conversations is to learn a dissimilar perspective without judgment, bias, or debate. And when we come back, we're going to be meeting our guest, Andrea Lee. She's a speaker, author, and performance coach. Don't forget, Uncomfortable Conversations is sponsored by Thriving Women University, an affiliate of the Thriving Women Network. And if you want to produce a franchise show, TWN provides the media network training, coaching, and mentoring to do just that. How do you find out more? Visit our website, thrivingwomennetwork.com. We'll be right back after the video.
Well, everybody poops. So I think, I don't know what other people do in the washroom, but I'm there for one purpose only. And I know there's a lot of stuff about trans individuals, particularly trans women, and like assault and stuff in bathrooms. But I can very much tell you that any trans person that's in a washroom is there for one thing and one thing only. And if it gets into discussions about, seeing things that are private, something has gone horribly wrong.
I also think that it's an issue that's been weaponized against trans people because it's easy to say, we're really worried about cis men hurting women in bathrooms and that they could use this as an excuse to get in. And what they're really saying is they're worried about like men and toxic masculinity and violence from men against women. They're not really saying that we're worried about trans women's rights and their need to and ability to go pee.
I know that, they couch it in the guise of, we're just trying to protect, women when they don't want trans women to be able to use women's washrooms because, they're just a man in a dress. That's nonsense. They need to reach out and try and learn to understand us better.
Yeah, it just comes down to respect. I wouldn't call it somebody using a washroom that they can't be in that space. It seems very disrespectful to me, and it seems very out of place to have that kind of conversation in a washroom.
For me as a kid, I could just go around the world unnoticed and do my thing until it became the bathroom, because then all of a sudden I had to pick a side. And there are very gendered spaces and very gendered expectations, and it was just very stressful for me. I think that gave people permission to be judgmental or aggressive or violent towards me.
TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, and that's like an oxymoron if I've ever heard one. I don't know how you can be a feminist if you're excluding trans women from the conversation.
There's been many different ways of feminism, many different ways of thinking about it. In my mind, TERFs have come from this place where feminism is deeply rooted to the biological determinism of womanhood, which means that, a lot of TERFs or all TERFs don't consider trans women to be real women.
A lot of TERFs kind of are back in like wave 2. There's a certain way to be a woman, and they're trying to enforce their beliefs on what womanhood is. And if you don't check those boxes, you're excluded from what it means to be a woman.
In 95, I think it was, I had been volunteering with a local feminist organization. I had been volunteering with them for 3 years at that point, and somebody found out I was trans. When I had initially volunteered, I had told the staff members that I was trans, but they thought it was probably better if we just kept it to ourselves, that it wasn't anybody's business, basically. At that time, there was a very strong separatist streak in feminism, and that second wave separatist sentiment meant that trans people were not welcome. TERF was a term we came up with way back then. So I've been dealing with that kind of thing for a long time.
I am a feminist, right? So I just don't get what their problem is. Like, some of their stuff is really blatant, but a lot of it I find is kind of dressed up in almost a politically correct way. But by and large, the things that I've seen just are nonsensical. It's the statistics don't back up the things that they're claiming.
And it affects trans women especially, particularly in online communities. Those people can be incredibly volatile with their words and their harassment.
which perpetuates like trans misogyny and trans violence against trans women. Not only perpetuates it, but creates it.
They were complaining about the fact that transgender women were being allowed in the Olympics and saying that's so unfair. And then they were also complaining about the fact that a transgender woman won the Nebraska beauty pageant. And it's like, okay, so you're trying to say that we're too strong and we're too beautiful for, like, what? You know, like, it's crazy. It's just another form of discrimination.
It affects trans men in some pretty horrible ways as well. There's like beliefs that trans men are just trying to gain power by becoming more masculine, and they're like, you know, throwing away womanhood and stuff like that. There's a lot of very toxic thought and language.
They're just fanatically devoted to their own worldview, and nobody outside that worldview is accepted, period. And they've done a lot of really hateful things to people, doxing people and suicide campaigns where they're trying to get people to commit suicide and things. And they've had some successes in that.
You're tuned to Uncomfortable Conversations, where today's topic is transgenderism. There are some however, who disagree with the views that we've just heard and believe that the transgender has had a detrimental effect on safe spaces for women. Transgender prisoner Karen White, formerly Stephen Wood of West Yorkshire, England, who had confessed to committing multiple rapes as a man, in 2017 sexually assaulted female inmates after being transferred to a women's jail due to her declared gender change. And in March 2022, a member of parliament in the UK reported that a hospital told police an alleged rape in 2021 couldn't have really occurred because the attacker was transgender. This is according to the Telegraph. Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne, a member of parliament in the UK, told the House of Lords that it took a year for the hospital to acknowledge that there was a male in the ward where the rape allegedly occurred. The victim reported the alleged rape more than a year prior, but hospital staff told police officers that there was no male in the hospital, therefore the rape could not have happened. Said the Baroness, they forgot that there were CCTV, nurses, and observers witnessing the incident. So what is the impact of transgenderism in the workplace and in sports? You may be thinking, what are the issues there? More than 25% of transgender people apparently have lost a job due to gender bias, and more than 75% say they have experienced some form of workplace discrimination. So I'm joined here by Vera Thomas, podcaster and amazing lady in general. She has so many different talents. So first of all, Vera, can you share what laws protect transgenders from gender discrimination?
Yes, well, thank you and hello. And I feel the same way about you, CJ. The landmark Supreme Court case, Bostock and Clayton County, decided in June 2020 that federal law prohibits anti-transgender discrimination in employment. Now, this decision was built on victories in recent years wherein courts and federal agencies had taken the view that job discrimination against transgender people is prohibited by existing laws against sex discrimination. The EEOC has investigated and settled many cases on behalf of transgender workers and has identified LGBTQ workers' rights as an enforcement priority. To help us unpack this topic, we invited Andrea Lee, to share her transgender story and how her employers supported her. Hello, Andrea.
Hi, how are you?
And welcome back to Uncomfortable Conversations. So for our viewers who don't know your story, can you give us a brief summary of that and its impact on your wife, children, employer, and close friends?
Yeah, there was a point in time where I had, in my adulthood, where I had had a lot of boxes checked off in the things that we want to do in our lives. That's things like get our homes paid off, have successful careers, have wonderful relationships. I had a beautiful marriage, still do, of over 21 years, 2 daughters. One had gotten married. I got my ranch paid off. I had a wonderful career with Pfizer, the global powerhouse in biopharma. And I had decided to transition to a woman. And so in making that decision, when it came time to do that in the workplace, we didn't take long to do it. I think it should be done this way personally because it was successful to me, and I understand why other people do it in different ways. Every transition is different. What I did with the team that I was on was went to each one of them individually, told them what I was going to do. It wasn't completely a surprise because they could see the change in my style over a couple of years. And then I made the switch extremely quickly. I left the field after talking to my clients that I was the point person for. I told them what I was going to do because it does affect their business too. There was hundreds of clients that I was responsible for seeing as the point person for Pfizer in my area. And so I told them what I was going to do as far as the transition, that I would return after a couple months away and I'd be a woman. There was some humor about it, but everyone was clearly supportive. And if they weren't, I didn't know it. They told me I wasn't alone. Many of them had a lot of patients that were transgender. I found that somewhat surprising because I didn't know any other transgender people who had transitioned while I was going through this. So I did it purely alone. And so I did the numbers and I realized, wow, that's a lot of people in the workplace, or that's a lot of people in our culture. And I now know what the numbers are, and I find it fascinating. So it's maybe a good topic for future conversation. I returned after a couple months. My team was wonderful. They didn't have to go through diversity training, but they did. They did it because I was on the team, and I did. One thing I personally didn't like was that I didn't know what they were told on how to treat me, and I was left out of that conversation. So I felt somewhat responsible for some kind of education on how to deal with me, and I wasn't involved. The transition was great. It was short, and I've lived as a woman ever since. I don't go by labels. I don't like labeling people that might be considered extreme. I don't like on the right or the left. I don't live in a trans world. I didn't transition to be a trans woman. I transitioned to be a woman. And my transition since has been excellent, whether it's in the biopharma industry or in the fashion industry or in the high performance coaching industry. It's just been good, and I take things head on. I handle them direct, and I'm not soft.
Yeah. And if you can do your job well, why should it matter?
It should not. But it does matter to some people, and I can honor that. But my experience is that's on the outer edges of where we all live. Most of us live in a very self-absorbed world, and they're not giving me much thought before or after their interaction with me is done.
Wow, your story is amazing. So let me ask you, what are the most challenging questions that your spouse and kids need to understand? And how has your decision impacted you personally?
Well, personally, it was wonderful for me. But I was happy to begin with. I was very happy, very comfortable in my masculinity. I think that's why I could transition comfortably and not have a lot of personal therapy and things like that to go through. Although I think it's good to do that. I definitely think it's good to do that. And this being Mental Health Awareness Month, that might be something we want to promote. but it was really good for me because I finally was in alignment with who I felt like I wanted to, how I wanted to live with the rest of my life. So how I wanted to feel how I was feeling on the inside was now in alignment with the outside, and that felt wonderful. The impact on those around me, because of the way we did it, was short-lived. Everybody had something to deal with, from my mother and father, who handled it greatly, but they did go through a grieving process, and as did my wife. My wife went through the grieving process of not only what you envision your life like, as you would know, being a manifestation coach, you have this vision of your life. Well, my wife had to change that, as did I. And then she also had to go through the grieving process of losing a masculine husband that, rode Harleys, carried a gun, and lived in conservative Oklahoma, and trended to live a little bit on the right, all to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that might have haunted her around the high school age.
Andrea, I'm really glad that you are in the process of writing a book about your life, because you have so much to say, and we look forward to that coming out, and we will definitely have you on our book show, Bookish Talk, when your book is out.
Oh, it's going to be good.
Oh, yes. Do you have the title yet? I
do, but it's secret.
Oh, okay.
But I will tell you, it has to do with the conversation with my parents, and my parents have been wonderful my whole life. They've put the wind in my sails from the earliest age. So while they had to grieve the transition, it's all good.
So what advice do you have for parents who are concerned that their children are questioning their gender prematurely due to peer influence, particularly with hormone blockers such as Lupron being exceedingly dangerous drugs with a lot of side effects?
I'm not a proponent of drug usage in youth that aren't of the mature age to make that decision for themselves. And we limit the youth in all kinds of decisions in our culture, from wearing motorcycle helmets before they're 18 to the point that they can carry a gun or drink alcohol. So I don't see, and we do that we've decided that as a culture to what works for everybody, not just certain political classes of people, but we've made a decision on what kind of rules we put in for everybody before a certain age, and what we deem as the culture is responsible for.
Wow. Some amazing views there, Andrea. And so we're going to be having another guest joining us after the break, Shirley Wantland. She's the co-founder of Recovery Consultants, and has the goal of her company is to create a safe space for those with mental health and addiction issues. And she provides a non-conventional approach and complete recovery services for individuals and families battling substance abuse and all kinds of mental challenges. So look out for that. And we're also going to later on in the show look at transgenderism in sports. But don't forget, Uncomfortable Conversations is sponsored by Thriving Women University, an affiliate of the Thriving Women Network. And if you want to produce a franchise show, TWN provides the media network training, coaching, and mentoring to do just that. For more information, visit our website, thrivingwomennetwork.com.
Alba Diouf dreams of running under France's banner in the 2024 Olympic Games in Paris. The 21-year-old has been training hard to improve her timings in the 200-meter. But as a transgender woman, her hopes were dashed in March when the World Athletics Council banned athletes like her from competing in women's events.
The Council has agreed to exclude male to female transgender athletes.
WA President Sebastian Coe cited a common refrain: the need to protect the female category, a frequently used justification for the outright exclusion of trans women from athletic competition. The ban has left Diouf feeling marginalized and hounded.
Enfin, même si on est une minorité, enfin, on mérite de vivre libre, de mener une vie libre, quoi. On mérite de faire des compétitions et de courir, notamment dans la catégorie qui est la nôtre. Et enfin, on nous refuse cela, quoi. Enfin, le seul garde-fou que les femmes trans bénéficient, c'est le droit de vivre, le droit de vivre libre. Et enfin, on leur refuse cela. Pour moi, c'est de l'acharnement, quoi. Ouais, enfin, je comprends pas trop.
Up until World Athletics' latest move, transgender female athletes could take part in top competitions as long as their levels of natural testosterone were below a certain threshold, 5 nanomoles per liter of blood, a standard set in 2018 that threw into question the participation of elite female athletes with differences in sexual development, like South Africa's Caster Semenya. World Athletics, then known as the International Association of Athletics, recommended oral contraceptives to bring certain female athletes under the threshold. The regulations were roundly criticized by the World Medical Association on ethical grounds. In March, regulations for natural testosterone, often perceived as the sole determinant of athletic performance, were halved to 2.5 nanomoles for female athletes and must be maintained for 2 years for DSD athletes. And still, DIUF meets that requirement.
Moi, j'ai commencé mon traitement hormonal, ça fait 3 ans, c'est-à-dire que j'ai commencé en janvier 2020 à peu près, quand je suis venu dans le sud, quoi. Et j'ai commencé avec des oestrogènes, de la progestérone, des bloqueurs de testostérone. Du coup, j'ai commencé à avoir les résultats notamment au bout de 3-4 mois. Ça a été progressif, c'est-à-dire qu'on ne change pas du jour au lendemain, on ne devient pas femme du jour au lendemain, ça prend vraiment du temps. Enfin, c'est graduel, quoi. Et, oui,
son taux de testostérone actuellement est plus bas que celui de la moyenne des femmes nées femmes, des femmes dites cisgenres.
DIUF's endocrinologist Alan Berliner finds the ban confusing and calls it a kind of transphobia.
Pour ce laboratoire, le taux de testostérone pour une dame est entre 0,08 et 0,50, on va dire. Elle a 0,21. Donc elle n'est pas du tout avantagée au niveau sportif par la testostérone, puisqu'elle en a très très peu. Dans le cas d'Alba, qui est une femme, dans tous les sens du terme, elle est hormonalement une femme, et au niveau de la réglementation, de la législation, au niveau de la loi, une femme, tout est en règle.
LGBTQI advocacy groups say excluding trans athletes amounts to discrimination, and DIUF is determined to fight for her right to compete.
Pour moi, il n'y a pas de plan B, il n'y a pas de je ne vais pas faire les JO. Non, ce n'est pas une option. Enfin, il n'y a pas d'option pour moi.
You're tuned to Uncomfortable Conversations, and at this point in the show, we want to welcome Shirley Wantland. She's co-founder of Recovery Consultants, and the goal of the company is to create a safe space for people with mental health and addiction issues. So, Shirley, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose to set up the company.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I think as a person who looks like this, who grew up in Oklahoma, so I was excited to hear another Oklahoma connection earlier on the show with Andrea. I never fit in boxes, right? I never was like the other kids. I look physically different. I always felt different. And so there was always kind of this growing up within me, just feeling outside or less than or just different. And so I got into this. There's a lot of addiction in my family. There's a lot of mental health issues in my family. And while I myself am not in personal recovery, as a family member, having gone through this, understanding the toll that it takes within the family. And, as the oldest child kind of in the family, I was tasked to figure out what are the resources. What do we do with this cousin, this uncle who has addiction issues? What do we do with them? And I found myself calling treatment programs, Googling, and just feeling very overwhelmed and really unsure of what were the resources out there. I don't really understand. It's all expensive. They all say the same things. Their websites look beautiful. How do I discern which one's a good one, right? And so I came into this field as I was recruited kind of randomly, but I don't think things ever happen randomly. It's always synchronous. But working for a company that had I think they had like 150 different rehab facilities across the country. And I really loved what they did. And I kind of became like almost a call center, people who were needing help. And I started Recovery Consultants 10 years ago. We just celebrated 10 years in April. And with really the idea of like, I loved what I was doing before with the other company, but I felt very biased, right? Like I had to refer to their programs and, that just didn't feel right to me. As I got into the field more, I just could see there were other programs that were better served. And so I just wanted to be a completely unbiased professional that can help support people, individuals, and families that are in crisis because of addiction and mental health. And then what do they do? And I think that's where the company's evolved in the last 10 years. And a lot of the methods that are out there, which typically are rehab and AA, don't work for many people. It works for some people, but for the most, it doesn't. So what do we do with this whole group of people who are struggling and that's not their path, but they keep being told that's what they need to do. And then it's like the same cycle keeps happening again. So that's kind of how Recovery Consultants was evolved. And I always say, I think I'm like the right kind of crazy to really love this work and really love the families and the clients I work with. And it's all about instilling and holding hope for people who have lost it along the way. And I think there's always hope to be had for a different, reimagined future. And I really love what I do. So,
and you say you have a non-conventional approach. So what is that?
I have an approach that is not AA and rehab focused only. It is getting into the clients' lives, what is happening, because what happens a lot of times, and I still do use residential programs and rehabs. I think they're great for some certain situations. But what happens is people go away and they get treatment and they get support and it's great and there's structure. And then they have to go home, right? They don't live life in rehab. They live life outside. And that's when people relapse. That's when all the stuff comes up. And so instead of doing this loop of going away and coming back, why don't we do treatment where you are in your life as things come up? So there is no transition. There is no going back. You're receiving support and treatment while you're working or schooling or whatever your life looks like, that it's happening there and that you have support. And I think the other thing that's different is in the industry, there's so much focused on the drugs and alcohol, right? Because that's destructive and it's a crisis and people just get really worried. Oh my gosh, you just need to stop. But not enough people ask, why did they start in the first place? It's just about stopping them. But no one is taking enough time to understand, why did they start? What were the reasons that they would put their life in turmoil? And this was the ultimate coping mechanism for them. And so in looking at that and unwinding that, a lot of the patterns go back to childhood, right? We all cope. We didn't get certain needs met by our parents or teachers or loved ones in our lives. So we adapt and cope and we develop false selves, false identities, false personas, and we go through life like that. And I do think that addiction is another false persona that we have of ourselves, an identity we've created to just cope with the world and to gain love and acceptance the best way we can. And so how do we heal that from the beginning rather than just say that, oh, now I'm in recovery or I'm always going to be an addict or I'm always going to be an alcoholic? I just think that you're just haven't healed those parts yet. So that's kind of what we're aiming to heal the whole person so that they don't identify for the rest of their lives that they're an addict, that they're an alcoholic, that no, you weren't born into this world an addict or an alcoholic. So why should you leave an alcoholic or an addict? So it's very controversial. It's very different than what's out there. The AA motto is once you're an alcoholic for the rest of your life. And if you take one sip, that's it. And while that may be true for some people, I think in the large majority of people we work with, we find evidence otherwise. As you start to heal your whole person, you don't need to then cope with the same ways that you were before.
And you came into America with, I think your family was from Korea. You were immigrants, right? Immigrants
from Vietnam. My parents
from Vietnam. Right.
news.
And so is there a lot of prejudice in that community about mental illness and addiction? Is it much harder for people from that community to actually seek help?
Absolutely, because it's a community where a lot of values are based on success, right? And doing well and being good. And so certainly things like addiction and mental health are very much against those sorts of things. And there's a large stigma of kind of family shame. And not just your family, but like ancestral shame. It goes back like 1,000 years of shame. And so, it's changing, but it's still very slow, and you still have to fight against kind of old cultural beliefs that, we don't, it's almost seen as like you're airing out your dirty laundry, your ancestral and family dirty laundry for the world to view. And that's just no, no, no. And so it's a lot of reframing about you're in this position and you need help. It's not about shame. And, but yeah, that definitely still exists and is certainly a hurdle that we fight against.
Well, we're going to broaden the conversation now and bring Andrea back because we want to talk about how this conversation applies to transgender issues. And so, first of all, Andrea, welcome back. And
Thanks.
we had a video there about athletes who've transitioned, and also, there are issues in the sense that the women who compete against them feel that they're at a great disadvantage. So, what are your views on that subject?
I think my views would, without knowing everything that Sebastian Coe based his decision on, the decision came down to protecting women that were born women in their chosen sports, and I think that that's probably the way to go, especially at the elite athlete level. Think of everything we do now to protect sportsmanship and the level of competition so that a win is a win. Think of the people that have gone and taken a Benadryl or a decongestant and then they're disqualified from competing that day in their sport or competing in a certain event, whether it's a world championships or an Olympic event. We have no problem with that. We just say, oh gosh, well, we can't do that because there just might be a simple chance that could be a performance enhancing benefit that they would have. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, men have a performance enhancing benefit in a whole lot of physical areas over women. It's just a simple fact of biology. And the fact that we would throw that out so that someone else doesn't feel persecuted or gets to do what they want it begs credulity. And so for the sake of being political correct, we're ready to throw out sportsmanship and competition. If you're going to do that, then why even have the competition? Wins are wins, and people win to win and be the best. And that's the way our culture is, especially in the United States. We like to be number one. We like to win. We like to compete, and we celebrate our winners. And why someone wants to do that, and in effect, with what I think is an advantage, despite what the blood work says, I don't buy in.
Yeah,
I gave up competing myself because I just didn't. Because while there's women in my age group, if I chose to compete in there that are going to win because they're elite athletes and they're very good in shape and stuff like that, all in all, there's just going to be an advantage that I would have over someone whose mama said you got a girl when she was born. Simple.
So Shirley, what's your view on this from a non-political and non-religious viewpoint? How does the topic of transgender women in sports affect athletes' mental health on both sides? What would you say?
I would think that it has a great toll on people's mental health and not being accepted for who they are. And that journey that has led them to become trans and transition, I think plays an enormous toll and we do have a lot of adolescents that are considering transitioning, and they do with their families go through a whole deal of anxiety, panic attacks, stress, depression, and and suicidality and suicide attempts. That's a real thing that happens. And so I think that is playing on kind of the foundation. And so when they get to the place of being a professional athlete and performing at that level, that's got to kind of play into how they show up, right? And if they're being told they aren't able to compete or things like that, it's more of the message, you are not enough.
Let's bring Irina into the conversation. Irina, as a mindset coaching professional, what do you think about the athletes in sports issue? And going back to parenting, what do you say to parents and caregivers who might feel that their children are being too influenced to question their gender identity before they've developed their minds fully?
That's a great question. In order to answer it, I would say that we have to have our minds opened all the time. And for the parents, first of all, what comes to me is unconditional love.
Yeah.
You have to accept your child and understand. And I think it's important to have the deep conversations just to really understand your child and to ask, why do you think this way, right? Because the more quality questions we are going to ask ourselves and the kids, the better quality of the answers we are going to receive. And it's all about just opening ourselves, being receptive, and allow the child to really follow their path.
So
I would agree. I would agree with that. I see. I've had plenty of conversations, and while I might have a little bit more of an interesting view on allowing the use of pharmacological therapy in someone that's younger, I don't have any problem with children and youth and adolescents wanting to indulge in finding their identities. And a lot of times, if parents want to help them with that, engage in that, great. It hurts my heart to see parents that take it personally on how their children want to identify. That hurts my heart. And their children can, let their children find their own identity. You see it at the mall all the time. If you're wondering about gender identity, all you got to do is go to the mall on a Friday night and you'll see that it's a wide spectrum. And I like the fact that, I like it when parents will just let their children engage and find their true selves out. That's how you get a healthy little kid and a healthy adolescent.
Well, Andrea, you certainly have a very no-nonsense view about the pharmacological issues there, because you said earlier that there's so many things that adolescents aren't allowed to do, or drugs that they aren't allowed to take. They can't go to a bar and drink or anything like that. And yet doctors are handing out some very, very dangerous pharmaceuticals for transition way, way early. I've read some exposés on hormone blockers and what Lupron does, in terms of major osteoporosis problems, major mood swings, cancer, all kinds of incredible problems. Because when Lupron first came on the market, what people don't realize, it was a drug to be used only, it got FDA approval to be used for terminal prostate cancer patients, not for anything else, because the side effects were so bad that they thought, well, if you're terminal, it's okay. But now, for some reason, they're dishing these drugs out to youth who are basically the guinea pigs. And from what we've seen with other uses of that drug, there are likely to be some very, very serious side effects that will materialize maybe 10 years or so down the line.
Well, the pharmaceutical company is a powerful industry, isn't it?
Oh, yes. You know that well, because you worked for Pfizer, right? So
I did. Yes.
That's absolutely true.
As did I. I was a Pfizer employee.
Well, Oklahoma created some nice guests for Thriving Women TV.
So when we come back from break, we're going to share our final thoughts on today's topic, transgenderism, and share what understanding we've come to know from what we've seen. And if you have any additional questions for our two guests, Shirley Wantland and Andrea Lee, do join our Facebook group, Thriving Women TV, and post your question or comment. And don't forget, Uncomfortable Conversations is sponsored by Thriving Women University, an affiliate of the Thriving Women Network. And if you want to produce a franchise show, TWN provides the media network training, coaching, and mentoring to do just that. Just visit our website, thrivingwomennetwork.com, to find out more. And we'll be right back after the break.
The class action lawsuit rocking women's college sports. A group of current and former elite athletes say that allowing swimmer Leah Thomas, a transgender woman, to compete in the national championships in 2022 violated their Title IX rights. Zareen Shah is here in LA with the details. Zareen, good morning.
Riley Gaines is leading this lawsuit. She lost a fifth-place trophy 2 years ago to a transgender athlete. She says this development was due time and that the NCAA has been served. But the big question is, what change, if any, will the sports world see? This morning, former University of Kentucky swimmer Riley Gaines and more than a dozen athletes suing the NCAA, saying the organization's 2022 ruling that allows transgender athletes to compete in women's sports is in violation of Title IX.
A lot of people ask us, why did we wait this long to file a lawsuit? Well, we waited this long to allow the NCAA every opportunity to make the right decision.
The lawsuit detailing an incident at the NCAA National Championship weeks after that ruling, where Gaines tied for fifth place with Leah Thomas, a trans swimmer who had previously competed in the men's category. The complaint alleges that only Thomas would be allowed to hold a fifth-place trophy, also stating that the secret of Thomas's meteoric ascendance and dominance in NCAA women's swimming was retained male advantage. Athletes Caitlin Wheeler and Ainsley Erzin joining the lawsuit.
We're not asking for anything extra. We're not asking for anything special. We're just asking for the NCAA to really do the bare minimum and protect us, whether that be in our locker rooms, on the track, on the field, on the court.
Title IX is part of a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on sex at any institution that receives federal funding. While the NCAA will not comment on pending litigation, they tell ABC News in a statement they will continue to promote Title IX, make unprecedented investments in women's sports, and ensure fair competition in all NCAA championships.
This case can really bring a challenge to what is defined legally as a woman.
Leah Thomas will capture the win in the 200-yard freestyle.
Leah Thomas is not commenting on the current lawsuit, but in 2022, the University of Pennsylvania swimmer sat down with ABC's Juju Chang.
There would be scrutiny against me if I competed as a woman. I was prepared for that. But I also don't need anybody's permission to be myself and to do the sport that I love.
Advocacy group Athlete Ally says they appreciate that the NCAA is pausing and reassessing. They say they firmly believe that research shows that transgender athletes do not have an inherent advantage in sports, and they add they should not just be accepted, but celebrated. Janae?
All right. Thank you for that, Doreen.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to...
Well, Leah Thomas previously competed for the men's swimming team at the University of Pennsylvania, and she posted the 32nd fastest in the 1,650-yard freestyle time in the nation for men in 2018-19, and she ranked 65th and 554th in the 500-yard and 200-yard freestyle, respectively. So those aren't great figures in terms of her performance as a man. However, Thomas has dominated many, but not all of the swimming races in which she has competed against biological women. The argument against the 6'1" Thomas competing against biological women swimmers is that nature endowed her with certain post-pubescent physical attributes that provide a competitive advantage. These attributes include larger heart size, more hemoglobin, leaner body mass, and larger lung capacity. And these physiological factors underpin the strength, speed, and recovery required to be competitive in most sports. Now, hormonal therapies that decrease testosterone and increase estrogen can significantly reduce the advantage of being a male, a biological male, but nonetheless, there are still natural male advantages, including bone structure, heart size, and lung capacity. Those are not eliminated by hormonal therapy, especially if the transition is post-pubescent. So welcome back. This is Uncomfortable Conversations, and we're talking about the impact of transgenderism in the workplace and in sports. And we've had a very robust conversation that reminds us that we must be willing and ready to have difficult conversations to learn dissimilar perspectives. And so we're going to bring back our two guests here. We've got Shirley Wantland, and we also have we have Andrea Lee. And so it would be great to get a 1-minute comment from each of you guys, guys and gals. I usually call everybody guys, so don't worry about that. But it would be great to have comments from everyone about just a 1-minute comment to give your views on this thorny issue of transgender competitors in sports. First of all, Shirley, let's have your view on this.
You know,
a 1-minute view.
I think we're in unprecedented times, right? We're now facing a situation that we've never had to really deal with in this way. And I agree with what Andrea said. There are innate differences physiologically and biologically between someone who's born a female and born a male. That's just biology. That's not discrimination. That's not, those are just facts. And I look at it in the same way that when we look at kind of racism in this country and there was, I don't see color. Well, that then is kind of applying to here. We're just saying, oh, I see everyone as the same, but we're not appreciating the difference or the struggle that they had to get there. So although I see there's a biological difference between men and women who are born biologically that way, there's also this part where I'm conflicted. I don't know how to celebrate them and how to have them participate in the sports and the activities they love as the gender that they identify. So I don't have any solutions. I do see both sides of it. And people who get paid a lot more money and have much more conversations about this are left to figure this out. But I do see both sides of it.
Irina, how about you? What's your view on the issue?
You know what? It's like a great fact of awareness, because honestly, I wasn't aware about everything what's going on, like with the transgender, but it's great to bring it to light and just to say that we are all here to enjoy our life to the fullest, and we are here to be accepted for who we truly are, for our authentic selves. And I think all these issues can be resolved for the greater good of everyone.
Beautiful. And Vera, how about your view?
You know, I'm feeling like the rest of the panel. It's a tenuous situation. What my opinion is that there should be another category specifically for transgender athletes so that they can perform, but they're competing against each other that are the same, rather than being in the categories with females who are biologically different. And in my opinion, it's unfair to both the transgender and the biologically born female. So why not have another category for transgenders that will allow them to compete against themselves, just as women compete against themselves? You know, I mean, that sounds like a solution to me.
It's a solution. We just need enough of them to make it an interesting competition. We need plenty of trans people in all the different categories to be competing against each other. Well, we're starting to run out of time here. Just finally, first of all, Andrea, if people want to get in touch with you and find out more about the counseling work that you do, the consulting work you do, how do they find you?
They can find me at AndreaLee.com. It's Andrea Lee, Leigh.com. And I think if we had a third category, we would just argue over who's on the most blockers and who's taking the most testosterone. So I just think there's choices. When you make choices, there's consequences. And at the elite athlete level, then that's what we have to fall back on. Outside of that, I love what Shirley said about celebrating differences, because the division in this country can either be seen as a wonderful thing and helping us celebrate our differences and what makes us unique in the melting pot of the culture. And then there's the differences that are fostered for political divide in election years. And you don't discount that either. But it's an uncomfortable conversation, but I find humor in it, and I try to just not take it too seriously. It's a serious thing, but you know what? From my perspective, it's good to talk about.
Yes.
And your website again, AndreaLee.com.
AndreaLee.com. Yes. And it's in the middle of a little bit of an overhaul since I've left fashion, and I'm going into the high performance, high impact coaching. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think you have a lot to offer the world. And so
I think so too. It's going to be fun.
Over to you, Shirley. If people want to get in touch and find out more about the recovery services that you offer, how would they find you?
Absolutely. They can go on our website, which is recovery-consultants.com. And you can book a free consultation call with me, and we can talk and see what your situation is and in what ways we might be able to help or get the services that can help you.
Well, Shirley and Andrea, thank you so much for being guests on the show today. We could go on for another hour. I think we have plenty that we could be talking about, but I think I have to hand over to Vera. She's got some things she wants to do to take us to break.
Yes, this has been very enlightening. And if you have additional questions for our guests, join our private Facebook group called Thriving Women TV and post your questions or comments. Uncomfortable Conversations is sponsored by Thriving Women University, an affiliate of the Thriving Women Network. If you want to produce a franchise show, TWN provides the media network training, coaching, and mentoring to produce your franchise show. For more information, visit our website at thrivingwomennetwork.com. We will be right back.
Okay, so here are 6 things you could do to make your workplace transgender friendly. 1, integration. In your company, hopefully a senior manager will represent transgender rights within the company. This could be somebody that would attend the LGBT meetings, send out communications, but somebody that's a very, very visible beacon. The reason for this is because in the organisation you may have trans individuals who want to transition and are too scared to, or those who already have but haven't shown or expressed themselves to the company at this point. Try and find out within the company how trans people have experienced your organisation. This could be via the switchboard or reception or via your interview processes. And when you're writing your policies or planning any initiatives, try to consult more than one trans person. As I've highlighted, our experiences and journeys are very different. 2, reach out. As you remember in my earlier part of this talk, there were no companies in the 90s that were very trans visible, so you need to get out there and show your trans credentials. Maybe sponsor a trans event or donate to some trans charities, or possibly write some targeted publicity for placement within the trans groups. There will also be changes in legislation for trans in the future, and it would be good if you could say that you supported it on social media. We all look at social media and we will see that your company is supporting that, and that will be good for your brand. 3, how welcoming is your organisation? So think about, for instance, your switchboards. How would somebody running your switchboard handle a voice that doesn't match up with the gender name? Your reception, the same thing. You're having an event, somebody's booked the event as a male and turns up expressing as a female. How would they handle that situation with names? Pronouns, how would your reception handle pronouns? Why don't they use the term something like, I have a visitor for you, instead of I have a lady or a gentleman here to see you? If in doubt with pronouns, it's actually okay to ask somebody. For instance, saying, I want to be really respectful, and clarify which pronouns you use. And that's fine, providing you actually ask everybody that within your reception area. Can you remove gender from all your written communications? Do you actually need gender in any of your policies? Maybe you should think about putting a gender-neutral toilet in if you don't have one. 4. Challenging prejudice. Now, this could take the form of intentional misuse of pronouns, so calling a trans woman he, for instance. Also asking inappropriate questions, such as, when did you have your surgery? Or can I see photographs of you before you were a woman? Also, social exclusion is another form of prejudice within the workplace, so not inviting somebody out to the pub when you're all going out for a drink. Also, within the prejudice thing, remember about Section 22 of the Gender Recognition Act. Remember that that is confidentiality. You should not release somebody's gender history as part of any interview process or anybody in an official capacity within your organisation. It is in fact a criminal offence. Try to educate your staff on trans awareness within the company. Better awareness means probably less prejudice. And also empower your staff to challenge prejudice immediately. Do they know how to do that? And if they don't, maybe you should train them in how to.
It's interesting because most of the people who own small businesses here, some of which are really struggling, their main concern is not whether a prospective employee is trans or not. They just want somebody who can do the job well. That's really the most important thing. Can they do the job? And I remember we had that same video playing when we were covering some transgender issues about a year ago or so. And Sabrina Protic was co-hosting with me, and she was talking about when she was working in the corporate world as an African-American woman in the 1980s and 90s, I think. And she said that she just had to prove she was at least as good as her male counterparts, as her white male counterparts. She wasn't expecting she had no sense of entitlement. She wasn't expecting any additional services. She wasn't asking her bosses to contribute to African-American female charities. She just wanted to show them she could do the job. And so I think that is a big issue. But we're tuned to uncomfortable conversations here. We're having some controversial discussions on transgenderism in the workplace and in sports. And we do want to thank our viewers from around the world for supporting our conversation on that topic. And we want to thank our amazing guests today, Shirley Wantland, co-founder and CEO of Recovery Consultants, and Andrea Lee. She's an author, speaker, and business coach who talks about her journey transitioning from a man to a woman, going through the corporate world doing it. And that's a pretty amazing, she has an amazing story, and we're looking out for her book. When her book is published, we will definitely be covering that on Bookish Talk. So over to you, Vera.
Yes, and if you have comments about today's topic or for us, join our Thriving Women TV Facebook group and post your experience as we can learn, so we can learn. Don't forget to tune in to Every Child Can Learn today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Their mission is to reimagine education and make learning simple for children. Uncomfortable Conversations is sponsored by Thriving Women University, an affiliate of the Thriving Women Network. If you want to produce your franchise show, TWN provides the media network training, coaching, and mentoring to do just that. For more information, visit thrivingwomennetwork.com.
And we will be right back next week with more uncomfortable conversations.
Yes. Have a good evening.